So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to join the third session of the Digital Food Series 2021. A little background, the Digital Food platform webinar series has started in 2021 to focus on the theme of connecting data, technology, and strategy, and connecting people, ideas, and regions. The central theme is that to develop a global community of interoperability practitioners. So we'll go into that topic more. And in the 2022 series, today is the third session, we focus on user cases. And the key question is to answer what is needed to create trust among connected players in the food system. How do we define value allocation models for providing data? And to apply information throughout the entirety of the food chain. My name is Tiffany Tui. I'm your moderator of today's session. I'm a global strategist, consultant, and entrepreneur. I focus on sustainability and transformation and bridging East with West. So today we have a speaker, Mark Hoolwerf. He is the area manager for Port of Amsterdam. So today we'll discuss and focus on the case of Port of Amsterdam, trying to become the most sustainable port in the world. So to introduce that topic, let's start with a little poll question. Anushka is our food log digital food team member. She will be working with me on the poll questions today. Yes. So first question is, do you know which country is the biggest exporter of cocoa beans? Wait, I cannot, oh yeah, I'm the co-host, I cannot enter, it's good. And the second question is, which country then is the biggest importer of cocoa beans? So when everyone's answered, we can show the result, Anushka. Are we done? Shall we show the poll result? Okay, so the biggest exporter, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana. Oh, okay. Oh, most people got it right. And also for the second question. So here I will show, oh, wait. Let me just show some maps here. So in this screen, indeed, you can see that the top, this is the biggest the global trade network, right? Mark knows this very well. And then indeed, the biggest cocoa export countries are Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Netherlands. And also indeed, the biggest importer is the Netherlands. So, and then Mark, where do these cocoa beans go? In the Netherlands?
Yeah, that's a good question. So predominantly they come in the Port of Rotterdam, and then they are transported by barge to the Port of Amsterdam. And then the Port of Amsterdam proper has a lot of storage companies where the cocoa beans are taken off the vessels and they are stored. And they're mostly stored for the large processing companies that are located across the canal. So in Zaanstad, which if people that come from the area might sound quite familiar because of the very strong cocoa smell that you can smell when it's the cocoa season. But Olam, Cargill, those are the main processing companies, and there they turn the cocoa beans into semi-fabricated goods. So cocoa powder, cocoa butter, and cocoa liquor. And that is then exported again towards mostly Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, to be processed into chocolate goods.
So Port of Rotterdam is for cocoa, but then also a lot of other commodity products. It's a very important global intermediary.
Yeah, the Port of Rotterdam definitely.
Port of Amsterdam. Yes, yeah. Sorry.
No, that's not a problem. I get that quite a lot, but it's also the case that the Port of Rotterdam is also a very large commodity port. But so is Port of Amsterdam. And in terms of cocoa specifically, the Port of Amsterdam is the biggest cocoa importing port worldwide. And cocoa is not the only agri-commodity that comes through the Port of Amsterdam. There's quite a lot of different agricultural goods that flow through our port.
Yes. So today you will tell us what does sustainability mean for Port of Amsterdam. So why don't you start with our first part of introducing your ambitions?
Sorry, what will I start with?
The first part of introducing the topic. Yes.
Yeah, of course. Do you want me to
yes, please.
The presentation? Yeah, definitely. There we go. Let me first go to the correct page. I don't want to give it away. Don't want to start with the ending. There we go. So again, thank you very much for the introduction, Tiffany. Also, thank you very much for having me here today. Very small introduction of myself. So as Tiffany mentioned, my name is Mark Hoolwerf. Actually now the Deputy Director of Port of Amsterdam International, which is the international department of Port of Amsterdam. And I've worked at the international department for about 7 years now. And my job entails different kind of activities. So focused on business development, but I also work very closely with our CSR department in basically determining, okay, what is it that we want to achieve in terms of sustainability at Port of Amsterdam, and how can we make that concrete. So just to start off with a general introduction of Port of Amsterdam, I don't know about if a lot of people that are present here today have a thorough understanding of the profile of Port of Amsterdam. So this image kind of outlines the layout of the Port of Amsterdam and the 5 key clusters that we identify. So first you have real estate, and then the primary cluster still is energy. And then we have agricultural materials, the circular economy, and cruise.
Mark, I don't know if it's my screen because I don't see, it's not on play. So, is it you're playing, because I only seeing the first page still, just to check.
No, it's a still image.
Okay, no, I mean it maybe you can put on the presentation, because I see the sidebar also. I don't know if it's my screen or.
Oh no, I think I.
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
That's good. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh. A small reboot always works. Right. So when you look at the total profile of Port of Amsterdam, it's still very much an energy port. So when you look at this, the pre-COVID throughput, just for the Port of Amsterdam, it was about 78 million tons. And you can see that about 75% was energy related. So in particular, liquid bulk, so oil products mainly, and still quite a significant segment of dry energy, which is coal, basically. And then the last quarter has a wide range of different goods, with agricultural being the biggest. Obviously, we've already seen quite a significant change over the last 2 years, with the whole COVID pandemic having quite an influence on the total throughput. So I think right now we are at about 75 million. But you can already see a shift happening in terms of, okay, what it is that defines the Port of Amsterdam. And I think there's a couple of key elements that influence that transition. So in the first place, with regards to coal. So Port of Amsterdam made a decision, I think back in 2015, 2016, to say that, okay, we are going to stop with facilitating coal in the Port of Amsterdam. So there's 2 main terminals that handle in coal, so for storage and transshipment, and their concession agreement runs out by 2030. And we said, so when that concession agreement runs out, we will no longer allow the processing, the transshipment of coal. So that was already quite a monumental decision, I think, because that was the first time that Port of Amsterdam said, okay, this good is no longer desirable for the port, so we're going to stop facilitating it. At the same time, what we said, so we no longer want the product, but we do want the client. So we are working with the 2 terminals to see if we can help them transition into new goods. So you can already see that's one of the terminals is transshipping scrap metal, for example, dry bulk, other types of goods. So that already is a big hallmark of a change away from kind of fossil energy sources towards other goods that might replace it in terms of volume. Second is the importance of the circular economy. So I think also in 2015, around that time, it was made a priority, a strategic priority for the Port of Amsterdam to develop the circular economy. And one of the key elements that we saw is, in particular, the connection with the city of Amsterdam. So you can kind of see it, it's a stylized map, but like the city of Amsterdam is located right around here. So it's very close, in very close proximity to the Port of Amsterdam. And that provides a lot of opportunities for the circular economy. For example, by reusing waste, organic waste, plastic waste, waste that is generated by the city, and that can be processed in the Port of Amsterdam into new circular goods. So you can already see kind of the profile shifting. And that also means basically a new definition of what it means to be a port and in what way you contribute. So traditionally, all ports, they basically measure their success in terms of throughput. So even when I started this introduction, I started with, okay, this is the total volume that the Port of Amsterdam has transshipped in 1 year. So for us, it's 78 million. In the case of Rotterdam, it's 400 million. In the case of Antwerp, it's 200 million. That's the way that ports define their success. But in particular, when you have a transition towards a circular economy, tonnage is not that important anymore. So what you are looking at is, okay, what is the added value that we generate? Now you can already see that added value is included here in the image that speaks to economic added value. So you talk about it adds about 7 billion euros every year to the larger Amsterdam area. But added value can also mean societal value, environmental value. It's not singularly economic value, monetary value, but it can be from a broader scope.
Mark, I think you need to press down the screen because that's the next slide. Is your screen showing?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. The PowerPoint is working properly, right, or no?
Well, we're not sure because I think you're talking about next slide, but it's on the.
No, I was making the transition to the next slide.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if the image was okay.
The image okay, but you can maybe
right.
press on the presentation mode so you can see the full screen of the sheets.
At least on my end, it is on the presentation mode. So.
Oh, mine not. So I don't know the others, but okay.
This is what I mean. You are sharing the wrong screen. We see you in the work screen, so you should reshare presentation mode. That's why it doesn't work.
That's
Sorry,
Christian Miller from Global Gap, well, everyone. So that's please, indeed, I think you maybe have to go to the presentation screen. We see the working screen.
Yeah, again, I mean, so from my end, it is on the presentation mode.
Now it's good. Now you can press it. We can see the next page now. But
right.
Good.
So this mode works.
Yeah. Now we see the target. Sustainability is priority, right?
Okay, that's very weird because from my end, I'm now not in the presentation mode, so it's actually on the work mode. But okay, if this picture is good for you, then that works for me.
Okay, let's continue.
Okay, very weird, but okay. Right. So, like I mentioned, there's already transition happening in terms of the composition of the Port of Amsterdam, and that is also reflected in our new 5-year strategy. So. The image that you see here is the strategy that we have for 2021-2025. And the key objective is to be at the forefront of the transition. Are you okay, Dick? Is it visible? Okay. So you're on mute now. So I don't know if you had a comment.
We are looking at your slide 3 now. So which one are you on?
Yeah, slide 3. So
Okay.
the image with the strategy and the goals.
And
Right.
now if you would move your arrow to the presentation mode and it's what, yeah, click on it.
I think there's like some kind of delay happening or what.
Oh.
Now it's on presentation mode for me.
We not.
It isn't with us.
Yeah, that's very weird because it is for me. So I don't know what the delay is. What's causing the delay?
Issue. Okay.
You should reshare the screen. Stop sharing and reshare.
Yeah,
and then
let me try that.
presentation.
Yeah, I can try turning it on again and off again, on again.
So Anushka, you shared your screen now.
Maybe that's
Is this better or
yeah,
no?
that's good. Now we can see.
Yes, and you yell, Mark, when you need the next one.
No, it's still me sharing. So
Oh, it's still you. Okay,
yeah,
that's
still
great.
Now it's good.
Hopefully now we have a clear image. Right. So to continue, new 5-year strategy. The main objective to be at the forefront of the transition. So what we have done is we have defined the 3 main strategies that we will apply to obtain this objective, and we have defined 7 quantifiable goals. So this is what we want to achieve in the next 5 years. And I think in the context of this presentation, 3 are very important. So the first is maintaining our market share, but in the energy transition and with the help of the circular economy. So as you can see, there's still some attachment to having volume through the Port of Amsterdam. But it's also, we are moving, like I said, we are moving away from coal. So the expectation is that it will fade out over the next couple of years. So that already means that a large chunk of what currently comprises our throughput leaves. And in the energy transition, there's also the expectation, at least, that it needs to be replaced with other renewable or alternative fuels. So what we've said is then the growth needs to come from other cargo segments as well. So in particular logistics, but also very importantly, agro commodities. Second, so currently, like I said, about 75% back in 2019 of our throughput was related to the energy sector. And that energy sector is for the vast majority still fossil based. So when you look at the second goal, so it being the majority of the largest cargo segment in our port also means that it's the majority of our turnover as Port of Amsterdam, as we generate revenue from port dues. So basically the money that a vessel needs to pay when it sails into the Port of Amsterdam, and leaseholds. So basically the lease that a company needs to pay us for using the land. So already you can see that in 5 years it's quite a 180 to move away from fossil related turnover for our revenue towards non-fossil turnover being the majority of our revenue. And the third one that's also very important is goal 5. So Port of Amsterdam, it's quite limited in terms of physical space. So ballpark, it's about 1,500 hectares. For comparison's sake, I think Rotterdam is about 4 times that size. So you have to be very, very diligent in the way that you fill in the available land. So right now it's really at a premium. There's a lot of demand still for area located in the port, but there's not sufficient land to facilitate all these different types of activities. So what we have done is for the remaining hectares that we have available, 25 of them have been reserved for strictly circular activities. So that's already a reflection of the importance that we attach to the circular economy as one of the pillars of the future of Port of Amsterdam. Oh, I think I messed up because, wait, there we go, that's easier. That's actually goal 7. So it's not 25 hectares, it's 45 hectares. And 25 will be specifically for circular economy, right? Now it's 25 for the circular economy, and then we create 45 hectares of development space for a transition to a sustainable economy. So with space at a premium, we have decided to allocate that space to sustainable industries. And now I'm gonna go to the next one. I hope this is available.
It works. It
Yeah,
works.
okay,
Don't worry.
perfect. Yeah, I just want to make sure after all that. So what we have as Port of Amsterdam is then also a sustainability program. So it's the recognition that sustainability plays on multiple levels. So what you see here is 3 different levels and 5 key themes. So when we developed the sustainability program, we defined the key material topics. So what are the areas where we can have that are of large importance and where we can have a big impact? So obviously, already based on the introduction I just gave, the energy transition and the circular economy are one of the premier subjects for the Port of Amsterdam. Then we have environment in the surrounding area, clean and safe shipping, work and knowledge, and a responsible supply chain. So for these 5 material topics, we have defined goals and activities on 3 different levels. So the first is the responsible organization, which basically means the business operations of Port of Amsterdam proper. So just to give an example, in terms of work and knowledge, we want to provide our employees possibilities to keep developing themselves, to embark on training courses, to have an opportunity to switch careers, just to make sure that they have the ability to develop continuously. At the same time, we also have a target in terms of, or we are working on the target for CO2 emissions, just to give an example. The second level is on the sustainable port. So that is strictly the area that we manage as a port authority. Now you can imagine when you look at the circular economy, that means that we try to facilitate these different circular companies. What is key in the circular economy is that you create an ecosystem so that the waste of one is the feedstock of the other. And by being the landlord, we can create these types of ecosystems. So by doing so, we facilitate the growth of that particular industry. Clean and safe shipping. That was another one of the goals. I think it's not really the most relevant for the presentation today, but there's also, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, we released our strategy for clean and safe shipping. So it's also a desire to limit emissions that are related to shipping in the Port of Amsterdam. And then the third level is the one of a committed partner, and that looks at the entire supply and value chain. So it's really the recognition that as a port, you are a hub where many different supply chains come together. So obviously there's a wide range of all these different types of cargoes that go through the Port of Amsterdam. And if you want to look at a sustainable supply chain, I think that taking your responsibility in every single link in that supply chain, taking its responsibility is key to really have lasting change. So on that third level, on the supply chain level, we also look at ways that we can contribute to a more sustainable supply chain.
Thanks, Mark. On that note, let's take a little break.
Sure.
Because you mentioned there's 3 layers as Port of Amsterdam roles. You are a company, a big company. You are a landlord, park manager, developer, and you are a enabling or one of the most important chain in the complete supply chain. So that's this accessibility issue also plays on different levels. So let's start with our second part of the poll question to also relating to our the first poll question on the cocoa chain, because that's one of the most, let's say, complex chains we can in the commodity. So these days, especially, this food price is becoming a very big topic. For a very long time, Western economies did not have to worry about food security or food prices, but now we are looking at the food price increase. If you look at a commodity product like cocoa, banana, and coffee, typically, despite a lot of effort on fair trade, on standards, small farmers at the grower side, they do not really receive a fair price. So the question is, how much do you think as producer their price will increase? And then the second question is, how much do you think as a consumer you would be willing to accept? Let's, of course, understand the second question may not be very fair, because, of course, if absolute value for consumers, 50% increase, it's a lot, but just illustrate the point. So once everybody answered, we can show the question. So Mark, in this issue, in Port of Amsterdam, in the cocoa as example, you are not directly in the supply chain, yet as illustrated by these poll questions, the pricing issue, the fairness issue is very important, but you are not setting the price, let's say, directly in the consumer space. You're not really having direct contact with the producers. So as an intermediary, as renting space out for companies, what can you do in this question to ensure, let's say, the fair allocation of value?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a difficult one. Mostly, so I think we are part of the supply chain. It's just we never control the cargo. So like you said, we don't have a direct link with the producers. So what you can do is basically, so the position that we have in cocoa is obviously unique when compared to other agro-commodities, as the companies that are our clients are storage companies. So storage companies also do not control or own the goods that they store. So the beans are owned by a different company, and they store the beans on their behalf. So in terms of cocoa, what we try to do is basically define our own ambitions, the way that we can contribute. We engage with, click that away, engage with different parties in the supply chain to see, so okay, what are their ambitions and in what way can we facilitate as a Port of Amsterdam. We participate in large multi-stakeholder initiatives. So the Dutch Initiative for Sustainable Cocoa is a good example, which has as its goals fight against deforestation, fight against child labor, and fight for a living income for farmers. And I think that's kind of like the strength of a supply chain approach of Disco, which Disco does, is to basically bring together all these different parties that are part or are related to the cocoa supply chain. So you have a processing industry, you have financial institutions, you have NGOs, you have governments, and also support. And Port of Antwerp, for example, also participates in the Belgian equivalent. And then jointly, you try to see, okay, what it is that we can do. So this party can do that, we can do this, we can collaborate on this particular area. And in that way, you try to bring about fruitful change. But yeah, I mean, in the end, it's kind of an indirect impact that you can have in this particular supply chain.
Yeah, we are looking at the poll result. I think it's very interesting, as expected. When asked if the producers should receive a higher price, you can see most people say yes, should at least 50% or double. actually 50% of our participants should be doubled. But whether the question is who should pay for it, and you can say, well, most of consumers don't think we should be paying for that increase, or not, at least not going beyond a certain level. So that's indeed the 1 million question in supply chain is, yes, consumers all want fairness. We support the value of fair pay. We support the value for labor standard, environmental standard on the producer side. They need to be paid more. Yet consumers are not willing to accept high price increase to pay for that. So that means the cost need to be distributed towards the chain players, the distributors, the big companies, the port, the transporters. And if that cost is not distributed, so certainly in the end, nobody will pay for it. So that's actually, when we talk about this sustainability question, it's first is what, and why, and how. So you answered the what does it mean? So let's talk about why. What is the incentive for Port of Amsterdam to talk about this topic, if that who is driving this?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go back, and hopefully it still works. There we go. Right. So exactly the why. So as I just outlined on the previous slide, the supply chain responsibility is a very important component of our sustainability program. So in our new strategy, we have also explicitly included it as one of the goals that we work towards. So that's a brief outline here on the left. I'm not going to dictate it, but the gist of it is that we want to be involved chain partner to really work with the different companies and to be a driving force for initiatives that strive for sustainable development of these supply chains. So as you asked, Tiffany, why would you do that as a port authority? Traditionally, when you look at a port, it's just to facilitate business. So actually having like a qualitative assessment of what kind of business you would like is already a step that exceeds that traditional role that you play as a port authority. So I think it can be distilled into four main components. So the first is intrinsic motivation. So as a company, the people that work for the company, they have the desire to do good and be better. So I see that throughout, like, all the different colleagues that I work with. There's a very high desire to work towards sustainability. Now, obviously, there's some discussion on how far can you go, but I think that's healthy. That's healthy part of the discourse. But in general, there's broad support for this subject at Port of Amsterdam. To click this way again. So second, I think there's also a commercial opportunity. So what you see when you look at supply chain development, there's a lot of pressure on these supply chains to be more sustainable, and it comes from multiple sides in that supply chain. So when you look at the consumer side, so the users of the end goods, there's already a growing movement, I think, to have products that have been produced sustainably. So that means that if that desire is there from a consumer, that they basically voice that desire towards a retailer, for example, then the retailer voices that demand towards a feed company, for example, and so forth and so forth. So then you get basically bottom-up pressure on that supply chain. And the same can be said if you look at desires from producing countries as well. So I think there we go. What you've seen across multiple supply chains, there is also a desire from producing countries to have more sustainable production. So there's really a commercial opportunity in the sense that if you can guarantee as an entire port industrial complex to have sustainable goods flowing through your port that can set you apart from, you know, the goods that flow through other ports, and can basically, position yourself as a port that can more or less guarantee sustainable products. The third is what we call the license to operate. Like I said before, the Port of Amsterdam is located, you know, right up at the city limits of the city of Amsterdam. And we usually say it's a city with a port. So in Rotterdam, the saying is usually it's a port with a city. For us, we are a city with a port. And quite often there are discussions with the city of Amsterdam in terms of land, in terms of what kind of activities you have in the port. So sometimes you collaborate closely, but sometimes you can have competing interests as well. So like I said, space is at a premium, but at the same time, the city of Amsterdam wants to acquire more space because they are also dealing with a housing challenge, for example. So if there is more attention for sustainability, which I think is definitely the case when you look at the politics in the city of Amsterdam. If you do not undertake any initiatives, activities to facilitate sustainable development, that can erode your license to operate, because then the city can question why you as a port authority have certain cargo flows. Just to illustrate that with a concrete example, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, the alderman for sustainability, Marieke van Doornink, she gave an interview in The Guardian. And in that interview, it was a dual interview with the author of the donut economy. And she spoke about child labor in West Africa. And she said like how good it is to also consider the impact of the economy here in the city of Amsterdam on a challenge that plays abroad, because some of the goods that we process here that are a key part of our economy come from that particular area. So that already hints at the fact that if you take child labor into consideration when looking at the regional economy, you also have to very explicitly look at, okay, what can we do to improve that situation? So it places basically a burden of initiative on the Port Authority to make sure that what we have in terms of economic activities that have an impact on the children in West Africa, that we do our utmost to also improve their situation. The fourth reason why is closely related also to the third reason, is reputational risk. So we have seen it quite a number of times that it's damaging to have goods running through your port that are alleged to be tied to sustainability. I'm trying to think of the correct word, but like some misgivings. So for example, we've had the discussion with coal. There was a research done by Pax, and they said that coal that was produced in Colombia, in particular regions, and the revenue from those coal was used by guerrilla groups. So it was branded blood coal, and they said, okay, this is also running through the Port of Amsterdam, and what are you doing as a port authority to make sure that that is not happening? We have seen the same thing a couple of years ago when there was a very large bulk carrier with soy, and basically the allegation was that it could not be proven if that soy did or did not contribute to deforestation. So particularly in an environment where there's increased interest for sustainability and where there's increased value attached to having sustainable goods, not doing anything and not contributing to sustainable development means that your reputation can suffer as well. So there we go. You want me to continue, Tiffany?
Yes, please. Let's just
perfect.
continue.
So that is the reason. Those 4 elements are the reason why we pay so particular attention to a sustainable supply chain and our supply chain responsibility. So it's kind of new to look at it like that. And so what we have discovered over the last 2 years or so is that knowledge is really key. So you need to have a very thorough understanding of the dynamics of particular supply chains. Like I said, we have a wide range of supply chains running through the Port of Amsterdam, and nearly each is different from the next. So we started with, let's say, case studies. We looked at 2 particular supply chains, one being palm oil and one being soy. And the goal of these supply chain researchers was to determine, okay, so what does the market look like? What are the sustainability challenges? Who are the players? How does the upstream look like? How does the downstream look like? What are the developments in terms of EU policy? What is the perspective of NGOs? And ultimately, that gives you the knowledge to determine the key challenges, to have insight in those developments, and then ultimately to determine the role that you can play as Port of Amsterdam. Like I said, cocoa, for example, means that we have a very different role because we have different types of companies that are active in that particular supply chain. They are storage companies, for example, for soy, and in the near future also for palm oil, we have processing companies located in the port. So these 2 were basically case driven. Parallel to that development, we were also developing our sustainable establishment policy. What that means is that as Port of Amsterdam, like I said, we are a landlord. So companies, they approach us, they say, okay, we want to have a particular piece of land for this particular activity. And we can decide whether we want to give them a concession contract. Very basic, but that's kind of like the gist of it. So usually when you look at you look at the business case, you look at what kind of investments need to be done. You look at if it fits within the environmental contours of the city of Amsterdam, if there's any nuisance related to noise or smell or emissions, those types of things. So for the first time, we have now developed a sustainability clause that is now fully integrated within the entire establishment process. So CSR is now one of the major components that we use to assess whether we want to locate a company in our port, yes or no. So there's 3 main subjects. That's the business operations of the particular company, its integrity of that company, and its supply chain responsibility. So for each of those subjects, we have defined our ambitions. So what is it that we would like to ultimately see in those 3 themes? So as part of the establishment policy, we review the alignment of that company with our own ambitions. What that does is that it gives you an impression. So is there a mismatch, for example? Are our ambitions way too high when compared to or basically is the client too low compared to our ambitions, or is it on the same level? It might be that they are on the same level when you look at business operations, but they might lag behind in terms of supply chain responsibility. But it gives you a very good idea on, okay, where do we need to bridge a gap? That means that you, as Port of Amsterdam, we can decide, and it can be a deal breaker. So it can be the case that we say, look, your ambitions fall short of our own ambitions, so we do not want to establish you in the Port of Amsterdam. It also gives you the opportunity to incorporate CSR agreements within the concession agreement. So a concession agreement usually it's a very long-term contract. So you talk about in general 50 years. Now for the first time, we are also including particular CSR clauses within that agreement. So again, hypothetically, let's say that a company is just short of the ambition that we have, then we can say, okay, we want you to bridge that gap, but we want to see in what way we can ensure that you can actually fill that gap. So it can be that they should take action straight away. It can be that we agree on a time path. Those are all options that we now have at our disposal. So the case driven, so the palm oil and the soy cases, the supply chain research that we did, and the parallel development of the sustainable establishment policy also had interaction with one another. So things that we saw, for example, in the palm oil research that we did, gave us ideas about, okay, what it is that we can include in terms of CSR agreements. Combined, we also are now looking at defining supply chain agendas. So that means that we, for ourselves, define an agenda per supply chain. So for example, a palm oil supply chain agenda. And we define in that agenda, so what it is that we are going to do ourselves as Port of Amsterdam, what can we do within our own port area, but also what can we do in the wider supply chain. And we also define what we are going to do together with the company in the port area and together with the company in the entire supply chain. And that way, you basically integrate specific CSR actions for that particular supply chain in our own business operations. So now it's an integrated component that the commercial manager, for example, might be in collaboration with the CSR department, but that he needs to work on, and that is tracked within our own strategic structure. So basically, this is already quite an assignment for a company as Port of Amsterdam. And what it really highlights is the need for structural due diligence.
Maybe on that note, we can take a break, Mark.
Sure, of course,
Yes.
of course.
I think it's a lot of information to take in. And
yeah, of course.
we have a very interesting participant, quite some people from Africa, because that's for commodity trade, that's really important in terms of understanding how is sustainability being judged and what does it mean for producer countries. But also we have Christian Muller from, for example, Global Gap, who's the standard setter certification body to help determine or establish trust in the chain, or one of the standards. So you mentioned in your presentation, that also last sentence, you say as a company, Port of Amsterdam, but in fact, in the role you are describing, you are also taking on the role of a government, a regulatory body, right? Because you actually need to uphold a certain ruler to measure whether the company who want to become the renter, become your client, live up to a standard in terms of corporate social responsibility or environment, also even including activities beyond what's happening on the site under your territory. So that's not just let's say a company role per se. So that's, yeah. And then another question, of course, you have many standards. So if you take this ruler, who is to judge that that is the best rule I can use? So which is indeed a related question, how, and what do you mean by, structural due diligence? How do you determine this kind of indicators and standard?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, with regards to the first question, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what the landlord function also means, that you have a regulatory role as a port authority. So that's an inherent component of what we do as an organization. Yeah, I think the thing is that ultimately the goods come through the Port of Amsterdam, and that is what you have some degree of control over, of at least saying like, this is what we would like and what we want, and this is what we don't want. So in that sense, you are perfectly, at least in my opinion, let's say, allowed to have an opinion of what's happening in the upstream of the supply chain, because ultimately it comes through our port. We have a responsibility for that particular port area. We have a responsibility towards other stakeholders as well. So in that sense, I think the role as a regulatory authority is perfectly fitting for that situation. Now, in terms of how and standards, so we, as part of that due diligence and those research that we did, you try to also make an assessment of, okay, what kind of protection do certain standards offer? So let's take soy, for example. So when you look at the soy industry, you have about 60 odd supply chain sustainability standards, and each offer very different degrees of protection in certain areas. A very basic division is like some accept legal deforestation and some do not accept any form of deforestation. So you can already see there's a difference. So we, as a port authority, then have to decide, so, okay, what type of standards do we feel offer a sufficient degree of protection when looking at those different subjects, and what is then which of those standards can we then accept as proof that the particular goods are indeed sustainable? But that's one of the key challenges that's also later on in the presentation that we have to face as a port authority, because we are dependent on third parties to provide that validation for us, because we cannot individually assess every single standard.
As the company, they also see that this will become the norm or the standard for all big companies anyway, the two who are playing, let's say, leading the chain or shaping the chain, that you cannot just say, well, this is outside my domain. It's not something I'm responsible for. But if you're participating in the chain, you must also have that knowledge of what's going on from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think so the level of development kind of differs per supply chain. So when you look at palm oil, for example, you see a lot of progress in that sense, and already a shift from, let's say, credits, like the lower level of certification, towards segregated certification, which already gives you a lot higher degree of visibility throughout the supply chain. And at the same time, and that's, at least in my opinion, also it's also closely connected to the very heavy publicity surrounding palm oil. So you're already kind of driven as a larger company to provide more insights in where does your palm oil come from, and does it contribute, yes or no, to deforestation. And at the same time, now you see also developments on the European level, in particular with the current proposal for due diligence, where it's an obligation as a larger company to have insights in what are the types of challenges and what might be the challenges for your particular supply chain, and what is it that you do when something bad happens in that supply chain. So yeah, I can definitely see it being institutionalized as a core component of all these companies that are active in those supply chains.
So a very important development is where you use obligation, so that the legal instrument coming from government level, European government start to impose on big companies to take on that responsibility and legally become a legal requirement, right? So it's become an additional performance criteria for companies to be able to even to operate, so that you might face stringent punishment, let's say, if you don't comply with the law.
Yeah, at least to my understanding, it might be the case that if you do not comply, your goods might not even be allowed access to the European market. And in that sense, from all the conversations that we have had with some of the larger commercial companies as well, it's they're definitely not they're mostly welcoming of this development as well, because the usual kind of forgot the word for it, but what why they would like legislation is because it creates a level playing field, right? So it's a very like level playing field is kind of buzzwordy, so you hear it a lot, but at least it gives like a minimal level of performance that every single company needs to meet, and that means that first movers, for example, are no longer at a disadvantage, because obviously it entails more activities, so higher cost. And now that's the same for every single company. So they have the same bar that they need to clear. And if you want to exceed it, you're more than welcome to, but at least defines a minimal level of performance.
That comes to our third part of the discussion. It's the how. That's the most critical question, because with this obligation, it will mean for companies, you need to go beyond just talking about sustainability or putting a nice consumer marketing, say we are sustainable, we can prove this, but indeed you need to have really in-depth knowledge about what's going on the chain. But also, as you mentioned, there are many different standards, and then all also unique to different chain. And you sitting, let's say in Amsterdam, you have to understand all hundreds of standards. How do you go about doing that and getting all this real data? So that's where the question of data comes in. I see Christian raised a question. So Christian, why don't you jump into in the discussion, please?
Thank you, Tiffany, and also thank you, Mark, for an excellent presentation. A lot of things I haven't thought too much about it, of now the responsibilities you are having and taking on. I think it's really great, as we have been working in this field for quite some time, and whether a big retailer buys and has to choose for their private label or for whatever they put in their shops, they have so many different SKUs, and they have the same discussion and the difficulty and sometimes the whole department to check which standard is right and what is. I think you're more on the logistics, and I'm thinking one of the biggest issues we're having, besides of looking, let's say there's the ITC standards map from the United Nations and all of these different standards. I'm sure you're aware of that. Otherwise, we can share the link here, where a lot of standards have been compared, at least from the paperwork. But the main area we're struggling with right now these days is the chain of custody, the transparency, the traceability. And I was wondering, that has to do with data, but I was wondering whether that is a particular case item you require in your landlord policy to keep this. Also, the due diligence legislation will rely on this. And if we would not have products losing their tracking and tracing in your harbor, then we might even be much better off. So if these companies also, have certain minimum requirements for traceability and get that being checked or being complying with and demonstrate this would help us a lot.
Yeah, and I mean it's definitely a challenge. So a very good point in that regard. So yeah, I think traceability and transparency. Those are two of the main subjects that we also look at when we make those type of agreements. So just to give an example, in terms of palm oil, so what we have said is, so okay, what we would like or what we want is to have sustainably produced, deforestation-free palm oil, and proven. So basically, proven sustainably produced palm oil. That's kind of the main point. So what we said is we want at least a segregated level of certification, so that you can already pinpoint that it comes from a certain mill. Ultimately, I think the goal would be that you know exactly what type of plantation it comes from, but yeah, there's also a sense of we have to be realistic in the types of demands that we place on it. So starting from the mill, but then we, like I said just now, so we rely on third parties to ensure that it is indeed the case. So for palm oil, if you take RSPO certification, for example, that is basically a label of third-party validation that it indeed comes from that particular mill, and in that sense that the chain of custody is kind of guaranteed. But like I said, I think that's one of the main challenges that we have is, okay, assessing the standard and relying on a third party to provide that validation. And then I think when you look in the port area itself, it kind of differs again per supply chain. So I think for palm oil, for example, if you have the segregation, it's against your own interest to lose that chain of custody in the port area because you already paid a premium for it. So why lose it in the downstream market?
But you're not thinking of a branding. I mean, I come from Cologne, and in medieval times, you just put it in the storage in the harbor, and then you basically, the Cologne people could buy it. It's almost like branded. You take not ownership, but you know what I mean. So even you could think of a brand of transparent products coming through the harbor. Yeah,
no, definitely that might be an option. I think, just to clarify, what we increasingly see is that the large companies, the trading companies, the processing companies, they already want to have the clear chain of custody. So, for example, like I said, in cocoa, the majority of the activities in the Port of Amsterdam is storage. But when you look at the storage companies, they have the cocoa beans of Cargill are separated from the cocoa beans of Olam, or the cocoa beans of Barry Callebaut or whatnot, because every single company wants to make sure that they know that the beans that they brought in are actually the beans that they are also taking out of the storage company. So I think there's a tendency, at least within agro-commodities in a broad sense, to ensure the chain of custody throughout. And then obviously there are some bottlenecks along the supply chain to guarantee that chain of custody. But I think then the challenge is more in the upstream, unfortunately, than in Port of Amsterdam. But it's still a key topic of concern, a challenge that we have to work on to ensure that we have that full transparency as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark and Christian. So let's come back to the question of the how issue. So Christian mentioned already a number of topics are very on the details, telling how do you manage the different standards, certification, traceability. So I think you can help us to understand what do you mean by doing this due diligence, which is also required legally by EU.
Yeah, so just looking at I'll try to be a bit quicker in the explanation. Right, so structural due diligence, like I said, I mean, the realization that we have had is that the challenges and the particularities of these supply chains can be very different. So they have different challenges, they have a different pace. Like I said, palm oil in terms of certification is a lot further along than when you look at soy, for example. So there's a clear need to have a very thorough understanding of these particular supply chains to make sure that you know the challenges and to make sure that you know what type of role you can play as Port of Amsterdam. So that's where the project of Wageningen University and Research comes in, the WUR project. So the next two slides are courtesy of the WUR. Thank you, Petra. So we participated as the lead partner in this project. This was a seed money project. So when we did the research on palm oil and soy, what was very apparent, there's a lot of information, but it's spread over a lot of different sources, and you have to talk to many different parties to get a full picture of all these particularities of that supply chain. So we spoke to NGOs, banks, governments, embassies, companies, a lot just to get a clear picture. And over the course of that research, we also spoke with the WUR, and they were already very aware of that particular problem. So we set up a seed money project where the basic premise is that Europe is one of the main destinations for a lot of agri commodities. But most of the environmental and social sustainability impacts occur in the production country. And usually there's a lot of information, but it's inconsistent, it's very fragmented, and in some cases it's also incomplete. So that is the situation. And at the same time, you have this new legislation what we just spoke about that places a larger burden on companies to make sure that they have like sound due diligence in place, that they are aware of the challenges, and that they have defined mitigating actions if they do come across any misgivings in their supply chain. So the seed money project was really aimed at assessing that situation, identifying, so, okay, what are the different information sources, how can we consolidate it, and where are some of the gaps in information that we can still fill in. So the seed money project is now proceeding to a full-blown project. I think we are starting, hopefully we're starting in April with a host of different partners, commercial partners, NGOs, and ourselves. And ultimately the aim is to define a dashboard. And on the dashboard that plays on multiple levels to provide a clear picture of the sustainability challenges, both environmentally and socially, for many different agricultural goods. So in the first place, it's on the national level. So for example, you can see Brazil highlighted here. So if we look at the soy supply chain, that's the soy that is imported from Brazil to the European Union or to Amsterdam in particular, what are kind of the characteristics of soy produced in Brazil? So the impacts, the risks, what type of data is available, what's the production levels, all those types of information. Now, the second level is then also on the subnational. And that is a very important caveat, because when you look at Brazil as a monolith, then you're going to miss a lot of different, very crucial details. So soy produced in the north of Brazil has very different sustainability challenges than soy produced in the south of Brazil. And that is something that you need to be aware of when you talk about these different supply chains. So the goal of the dashboard is to also provide, let's say, the estimated production circumstances and define like the environmental and the social hotspots on a regional level. And then third, you also talk about the global level, so the global agricultural trade flows, and that pertains to different commodities. So you have coffee, cocoa, cotton, soy, palm oil, you name it. There will be, I think, quite an extensive selection of different agro-commodities that will be put into this dashboard. And from the perspective of Port of Amsterdam, this is a crucial instrument for us to perform our own due diligence. Like I said, I mean, in particular, the research that we have done for palm oil and soy, it's quite labor intensive. I think it's very necessary, but it's quite labor intensive. And having a dashboard such as this can greatly improve our own efficiency and effectiveness in determining the due diligence, in performing our obligation to do due diligence. You want me to continue, Tiffany, or? I can't see you, can't hear you, but I'm just gonna continue on. So just to conclude, some of the challenges that we face as Port of Amsterdam in bringing this ambition of sustainable goods in the Port of Amsterdam to fruition. So the first, we already spoke about the reliance on third parties. Just the vast, the broadness and the vast scale of all these different supply chains, because it's not only for agri-commodities, but you can also look at supply chain responsibility for minerals, for circular waste streams, for energy goods, plastics. There's a very broad scope of all these different types of cargoes that come through the Port of Amsterdam. And it's just impossible in terms of our operational scope to perform the same level of basically to check if what we agree on with the companies, to check if they are indeed conforming to those agreements. So we rely also on third parties when we agree on a certain certification standard. For example, a third party should validate for us that it is indeed the case that our client is in compliance. So the second is, like I mentioned, different pace, different role, different definitions. Cocoa is very different than when compared to palm oil, for example, in terms of certification standards, in terms of challenges, but also in terms of the particular link in the supply chain that is located in the Port of Amsterdam. So for cocoa, our clients are storage companies. For palm oil, our client is a processing company. So that gives you a very different range of possibilities to have an influence and an impact on that sustainable development of that supply chain. And like I said, different definitions pertains to different standards, offer different types of protection. They might apply different definition of what it means to be deforestation free, for example. The very basic example of do you accept legal deforestation or no? So that's already a challenge for us to keep track of all those different definitions and then ensure that we pick a standard that conforms to the ambitions that we have as a port authority. Third is the difference between soft engagement versus contractual agreements. So the sustainability establishment policy applies when a company wants to establish itself, so a new company, or if an existing company wants to expand. So those are natural contractual moments to make new agreements. However, I also mentioned that concession agreements are usually for a long period of time. So traditionally about 50 years. So that means that there are a lot of companies right now in the Port of Amsterdam that are active in supply chains that have sustainability challenges, that have a running contractual agreement that might still be in force for the next 20 years or so. So that kind of limits the scope that you have as a port authority to basically force new agreements. So then we rely on soft engagement. So we engage with the client to see, okay, what are your goals in terms of sustainable development? How can we facilitate? How can we help? What do you need to, take a next step? But again, the leeway that you have is very different. Fourth, the alignment with outside developments. Again, duration of a concession agreement is quite long. So you also want to make sure that you still keep pace with the outside developments, meaning that if, for example, the standards are raised, you don't want to be in a situation where you agreed to this standard, which is right now a lot higher than what is usual in the supply chain. But for example, if in the next 5 years or so, the standard outside is raised to this level, and then you're still stuck, now you're a laggard instead of a front runner. So that's also something that means that we have to be continuously aware of what is happening in all those different industries in terms of standards, developments, new regulations, etc. And then fifth and finally is also the dilemma between perfection versus incremental progress. So obviously, some of the ambitions that we have defined is we want deforestation-free goods. Like I said, I mean, there's a large difference in supply chains where that deforestation-free can be guaranteed. So what do you go for? Do you then go say, okay, we want to exclude, for example, every company that cannot, beyond a shadow of a doubt, prove that his goods are deforestation-free? Or do you want to go for incremental progress? So, for example, say, okay, we want deforestation free. We realize that there might be some challenges still in terms of proving that your goods are deforestation free, and say, okay, we have like a different time path. So you need to show us within 3 years, for example, that you have third-party validation of deforestation-free goods. So yeah, that's kind of a dilemma that you also have to combat with. Do you go for perfect right now, or do you also provide, like say, a developmental path where we can reach our ambition in the near future as well? So yeah, I think those are 5 of the key challenges that we are still wrestling with today, probably in the near future still as well. But again, I think that none of these are inhibitive to us pursuing that ambition of having sustainable goods in the Port of Amsterdam.
Thanks, Mark, for sharing on this very interesting user case of using data and dashboard to solve the supply chain paradox, let's say, because we had earlier a session on the goodness paradox. Indeed, the world we're facing on selecting what is good is a very difficult one. What is good for one aspect could be bad for the others. And so the first step, understand this dashboard due diligence is for you to have the right information, to have a transparent overview, at least to understand what are the standards. And then actually also probably the immediate benefits for you as a landlord to choose your tenant, correct? Yeah. Or more subjectively or objectively.
Yeah.
But that's also, of course, you are in a good position that you can choose. You are in a hotspot, the land expensive, more companies want to be stationed in Amsterdam. But it can also be companies go elsewhere. Say, well, if I'm not sustainable enough for you, I go elsewhere. So that doesn't really change the question of the supply chain by itself. You just moved the problem elsewhere. So the question is, we have a lot of chain players. Global Gap is one. You have also the retailers, consumers. So how would this digital dashboard on what you are doing as an important chain player that can become a interoperable product or tool that can be used on a wider down the road? So it's step 2 to engage other chain players. Do you see that as a potential, because Petra just left, but do you see that as a kind of a ongoing step, or do you say, well, we'll have a nice information, the portal, and
no, no, definitely. So the idea behind the dashboard is to make it available. It's actually a precondition of the project that it should be available to everyone. So we are just starting up with that project. So it will have to be assessed in what way can it be made available to everyone. But that's indeed the goal. So I think, and that's something that we discussed before, if you have a universal taxonomy, it greatly eases that discussion, because then you know that you're all talking about the same thing, and that you are not, applying a different definition of what is deforestation or what is child labor. But then you talk about the same thing. So I think that's definitely key. And already we are looking beyond just the relationship that we have with our clients. But obviously, that's a direct link in our supply chain, where we're also talking with the clients of our clients. And we are also engaged, for example, with ports, in this case in Côte d'Ivoire. So we personally, I have a number of projects that I manage in Abidjan and also in São Pedro, to look at, okay, in terms of logistics, we know how a port can be managed. We have experience in that sense, so we can assist them. So already you see that as a port authority, you basically look at different parts of the supply chain then as well, to ensure that, okay, we are all working as a supply chain towards the same common goal.
I have a question from Sandra Mulder. Do you like to switch on your camera and the microphone, and then to introduce yourself and your question? Hi,
Hi,
Sandra.
thank you, Tiffany. Hi, I'm Sandra. I work for WWF Netherlands. And well, my question related to when Mark described the dashboard and the due diligence project with Burr. I was wondering if that because you mentioned the legislation on due diligence, and I just wondered if you also included the other legislation that is hopefully coming up on deforestation, but that was sort of more like a detailed question. I'm not sure
No,
if
it's
how relevant.
hi Sandra, by the way. But
Hi,
no,
Mark.
hi, no, definitely, of course. So I think policy development on the EU level, also on a national level, but in particular on the EU level, is essential for the way that you look at the different supply chains. So that includes the two main large legislative developments are the due diligence and the deforestation. So that is definitely taken into account in this project, but also on our company level. We try to keep track. So those are two very obvious ones, but we also try to keep track of less obvious legislations that have an impact on the different supply chains. Just to give an example, fertilizer is also a product that is produced in the Port of Amsterdam. So the EU is enforcing, I think in July, the fertilizing product legislation, somewhat. I'm probably remembering the name, but that also has a direct impact on some of the obligations of companies. So we try to take that into account as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. So we have still a few minutes of discussion time. I'd like to also invite other questions. Maybe Dick?
Well, not really a question, but a remark, and it links up with Christian's remark on branding a region. In a way, Mark, you are creating a business environment, and a business environment in a wealthy region that indeed creates this donut economy, if you want, but you are creating a brand. And well, you just talked about universal taxonomies, interoperability. It's an environment in which companies can interact. I mean, sustainability is an integral challenge, and you are creating that kind of environment. And I find it fascinating to see that it is happening. Well, as you know, I was rather surprised that a port can do this. Well, it's obvious a port can do it because you can be picky because there is a lack of space. So indeed, you can pick your tenants as you're doing it, but it offers a lot of potential in creating a business ecosystem. And well, various people are here. I don't know, Patricia and Nehat. Patricia, you are a standard setter, right? No, not a standard setter, but you apply standards. You take in clients as well. You know you're a NOBO probably. And Nehat, you're here. I don't know what you are from, but this you're a knot in this global world, trying to create a business ecosystem that is okay. Well, the EU is setting those examples, but this could be indeed a worldwide network of business ecosystems promoting these standards. Now, are you sufficiently aware, and are we sufficiently aware of the potential of setting these standards in an ecosystem? That would be, so my remark is, it is fascinating. I think we all see what we're doing. Christian says, isn't it a brand perhaps? Yes, probably it is a brand, but how do you go on developing this idea? And I'd be very interested on the remarks by people who are setting standards who are notifying bodies. Patricia, there you are.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. Mark, it was really educational what you're saying. My name is Patricia Obichukwu. I'm the MD and CEO of Best Produce International UK. I've been promoting Global Gap and IFS now in Nigeria and West Africa. My question, when you were speaking, you were mentioning a lot about palm oil. And I just wanted to, find out how are we going to make sure that the burden is not placed on the small-scale producers to carry the burden of the cost. That's very key to me, especially where your clients or your customers they are commercial entities and they want to make profit. So to meet your standard, to meet the extra demand, they will attribute it to the cost of the goods. And the poll we did shows, issue of fair trade, issue of fair pricing for consumers. So that's the area I'm just concerned, because when you talk about the manufacturing area for palm oil, what I was looking at is that we have a lot of small-scale producers who are producing this palm oil, and then the off-takers are taking them and then are selling overseas. How do we ensure that they are not the people that are worse off? Yeah. If we are not synergizing all the standards that are required to synergize, because the standard already is a heavy aspect. Meeting the global gap standard, meeting IFS standard is a major challenge for small scale holders. So how do you synergize with all others and make sure that the producers, small scale producers, are protected?
Yeah, no, yeah, very good comment. So I think a couple of points. So first, I think at least this particular challenge, it's a lot less pressing in palm oil than it is, for example, in cocoa. So from my understanding, usually palm oil is referred to as a cash crop. So small scale holders actually switch to palm oil because they can earn more money in palm oil than they can from another commodity. But for example, cocoa, it's a huge pressing need. And yeah, it's a very challenging one. So I think for palm oil in particular, again, there's a little reliance on third parties. So when you look at the RSPO certification standard, they are also ensuring some of the social aspects. So in that sense, we kind of rely on that system, the system that they have in place to ensure protection of small-scale farmers, that they earn enough and that not the full burden of cost is heaped on them instead of the companies that buy their product. So when you look at the agreement that we made with the new client, it also includes some of the social aspects. So labor exploitation, for example, is explicitly included within the agreement. So yeah, that's for palm oil. I think in general, when you look at some like cocoa, for example, it's a very difficult one. And I think at this time, we do not have an answer for it. So that's why, for example, we work and are part of DISCO, the Dutch Initiative for Sustainable Cocoa, to see if there a joint stakeholder approach can actually bring that improvement to the small scale, to the smallholders. But yeah, it's a very difficult one. And one, I wish I had a very clear-cut answer. So this is what we should do and what we can do to make it better. But unfortunately, because the role that you can play as support, because you're so far removed from the farmer, at this time it's still quite difficult. So we try to contribute in a different way through participating in a multi-stakeholder initiative and think about other ways that we can actually have a positive effect. But at this time, I don't have a very explicit, this is what it is that we can do.
Thanks, Mark.
Sorry, Tiffany, if I come in again,
Yep.
what of where you ensure that the small scale producers are integrated in your consultation process? I know that you mentioned about embassies, you mentioned about different categories of people you've consulted, but very often they are far removed from the ground. So their own contribution will be very, very limited. However, when you involve those that are really working with the producers on the ground that are working with the small scale producers, they can tell you exactly what is going on and how that can be affected, or how you can integrate that, in the process. So perhaps you should consider that.
That's a very valid point. I think for cocoa, as we are performing some of the projects I mentioned in mostly the ports, but in particular for the Port of San Pedro, we also engaged with some of the cocoa cooperatives. So it's not fully on the level of the individual smallholder, but it was on the level with the cooperative to have that consultation, to get a better understanding of, okay, where are your challenges? What do you need to take the next step or ensure that farmers can earn more money? So yeah, it's definitely a good point. But at least for cocoa, we already have taken the first steps. And I think as we, because we're now embarking on like a full scale assessment of the cocoa supply chain as well, I will definitely take note of your comment and see if we can engage with the smallholders directly as well.
Very encouraging to hear, Mark. And thank you for the great questions, Patricia. We start with cocoa and then we'll also end with it, because indeed it is the biggest commodity. And then Amsterdam
not
port.
Not in terms of total volume. It's quite small in terms of volume, but in terms of we usually say in terms of added value, it's the biggest commodity that we have. So it's about 800,000 tons.
Yeah.
So it's very small compared to the overall tonnage, but added value is large on the back of the processing industry.
Yeah. But then for several African countries, that's the only source of income. So in that sense, that it has a very
Ghana, it's huge.
Yeah, so for that reason, the Port of Amsterdam can play a huge role in shaping the supply chain on this one single product. So it's of course difficult, but I hope that we continue to hear this development from Port of Amsterdam, because that will be a kind of the key, one of the key products.
We will do our best.
Yes, great to hear. So our time today is come to the end. I thank you, everybody who joined and participated. And then we'll have our next topic in a month. So hope to see you all then. Thanks, Mark, for the great discussion.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
And thank you for a nice picture.
Everybody has already left, but thank you very much for taking the time and listening, and for your great questions.
Yes. Have a good day, everyone.